So welcome everybody joining this afternoon's webinar. It's great to have a webinar focused on employment for people with MS and the role of employment in the lives of people with MS. So this webinar is focusing on the challenges really of employment, what we know from research on employment, and also the lived experience of Mark, who has MS, with regard to employment. So it's great that we've got three speakers joining us tonight. The first section really is around what research there is. So what's the data around work instability and job loss in people with MS? Then we're going to talk about who in the multidisciplinary team and how and when talk about work difficulties with people with MS, and a bit about reasonable adjustments, what that means, how the team can be involved. And then we're going to hear from Mark around the lived experience of someone living with MS and navigating those issues around work. And our first speaker, I'm really delighted to welcome, is Charlotte Wicks, who works with me in Leeds and who is a research fellow in Leeds and has worked with us for a few years now, actually, on employment and MS. So Charlie's going to go through really the background evidence of the research around work instability and job loss for people with MS. Thank you, Charlie.
Thank you, Helen. Yep, great. So I'm Charlie Wicks. I'm a research fellow at Leeds. I'm going to talk about the evidence around work instability and job loss in people with MS, and talk about some of what we've been doing here at Leeds. So I have nothing to declare. So just to give an overview of what I'm going to talk about today, I will do a quick whistle-stop tour on the prevalence of job loss in MS. I'll then talk about how we can measure the risk of job loss in people with MS, some of the factors associated with risk of job loss, and then some of the potential interventions we might look at to help reduce job loss for people with MS. So in 2009, there was a study, a review of studies that showed that between 60 and 80% of people across Europe will lose their job within 15 years of onset. A study in the US found that 50% of people with MS were in paid employment, and the All-Party Parliamentary Group for MS in 2016 reported that 55% are in work compared with 75% in the general UK population. The APPG have recently published a new review which actually gives lower numbers, 41%. However, this is post-COVID, so the pandemic will have had some impact on those numbers. Whereas in Australia, while they were reporting that less than 50% were in work in 2010, this had actually increased to nearly 60% in 2013. So we are seeing a positive upward trend of people being able to stay in work. There are higher rates of unemployment in MS compared with other chronic disabilities. So this does imply that there are specific barriers for MS which don't apply to other groups. And a study in 2016 reported that 53% of the people with MS who were not in paid work would ideally like to work. So this is an important area that we'd like to try and improve on. So in terms of measuring for risk of job loss, we can do this using a construct called work instability. So this refers to the extent of any mismatch between functional capability and work demands at any one point in time. If there is a mismatch between these two, this is where somebody might see an increased risk of job loss. We can measure this using the MS work instability scale. This was a validated scale that was developed by Estelle McFadden in 2012 and her colleagues. This took qualitative work to develop this scale specifically for people with MS and then was validated for use. This is a 22-item scale which follows a simple true, not true format and can be self-completed by the patient. And if somebody were to score 11 or above on this questionnaire, then they would be considered at medium to high risk of job loss. So this is a really useful screening tool that you could use in a clinic to help identify anybody who might be at risk of future job loss. And you can access this by visiting the Leeds University page. I've provided a link here. I'm not sure if this is if there's a better way to try and share this with you, but it's fairly easy to Google as well. So in terms of factors associated with risk of job loss, there are quite a few. So physical disability, MS symptom severity and persistent, disease-related factors. Fatigue is quite a major one. Psychological factors and cognitive decline have all been associated with reduced work for people with MS. However, there was a study, a review by Pompey in 2005 that concluded that physical and cognitive decline alone are not great indicators of job retention. So it's a little bit more complex. We do need to consider psychological factors. So in 2013 at Leeds, we did a study that looked at psychological factors related to job retention in MS. This was a longitudinal multi-phase study. The first phase, we used focus groups to help identify some of the key themes related to job retention. We used this to help inform a questionnaire pack, which was sent out to participants across a period of 28 months. So you can see these were variables that were included, and these are the validated scales that link to those. We used an easy-to-read format for the questionnaires to reduce burden on participants, and we actually had a really good retention rate with 86% still returning their questionnaires at the final time point. Anyone who's ever done a postal questionnaire knows how difficult it can be to get people to return them, so this was really positive. In terms of the findings from this study, initially we found that anxiety and depression were strongly correlated with work instability, such that people who reported possible and probable depression were 7 times as likely to be reporting medium to high risk of work instability. However, we did find that over time this effect seemed to drop out, which indicates the benefit of doing a longitudinal study to see what the longer term impacts are. So the one thing that did continue was the impact of self-efficacy. Physical symptoms and psychological symptoms using the MSIS-29, as I showed on the previous slide, was strongly correlated, but this was mediated by something called self-efficacy. In case you don't know, self-efficacy refers to somebody's belief in their own capabilities and how that compares with their actual capabilities of what they can do. So you can see how that might link into how people are doing their jobs. So following on from this, I was quite interested to understand a little bit more about the experience of employment for people with MS. So I went off to do a PhD, and the first phase of that was to do a systematic review to understand the qualitative research that was already out there. This review found 4 major themes, each with their own sub-themes, and these ones that you can see in bold, stigma of MS, advocacy and symptoms, were the most commonly reoccurring sub-themes. So stigma of MS, I'm sure we all know about somebody who has said about somebody with MS being accused of being drunk because they may be staggering or slurring their words. This is to do with the symptoms, this isn't actually being drunk. And people can make some quite negative assumptions about people with MS through not being educated and not knowing enough about the condition. So this can feed into people's work experiences. People might be passed over for promotion or see that they get reduced, see that their work responsibilities are reduced. In terms of advocacy, it was often cited that people found it quite helpful to have somebody, usually an MS professional, advocate for them and their needs at work. So perhaps like writing a letter to their employer to say this person does indeed need these reasonable adjustments. And they found that they got those adjustments made a little bit more timely. And then symptoms, obviously symptoms are very difficult to manage with MS. They are fluctuating. There are new symptoms that people are regularly having to adjust to. So these are all difficulties in that make staying in work more difficult for people with MS. So then I decided I wanted to go and talk to people myself to see what their experiences were. So I spoke to people who had MS and were in work, people who were no longer in work. And I also spoke to MS healthcare professionals and relevant employers because I wanted to understand the overall picture of what might be impacting these experiences. So my analysis found 5 key themes, each with their own sub-themes, but the key themes were invalidation, adjustment demands, sense of control, social relations at work, and constructing social value. But what we're really interested in is how these themes relate to interventions that could be helpful for people to stay in work. So in terms of invalidation, there is a therapy called acceptance and commitment therapy. Now this focuses on improving self-efficacy and acceptance, but has also been shown to be helpful to address illness invalidation experiences. In terms of adjustment demands, strategies which manage individual symptoms can be very helpful, as well as generic strategies to help with coping and acceptance. Sense of control, we can look at increasing people's sense of autonomy, but this is quite a risky approach because there can be some negative impacts of doing this in terms of social relations at work, but also increasing the burden on a person who might start to see increased responsibilities and decision-making demands at work. In terms of social relations at work, organisational training, so that managers and employees with MS can have better conversations around any adjustments they might need in work can be really beneficial. And then in terms of social value, helping people with their self-identity, helping to improve their self-efficacy, think about goal adjustments, and improving their acceptance. This can all be helpful to people with MS who want to stay in work. So the one that really stands out to me when you think about this study and the previous study is this acceptance and commitment therapy. It can help with some of these issues, but also help with self-efficacy, which we found before was an ongoing correlate for work instability. So now we are doing a study which is based in acceptance and commitment therapy intervention. It's a pilot randomized controlled trial of a digital intervention called Ready for MS. So this is based on a series of work conducted in Australia by somebody called Kenneth Pakenham. He developed a group ACT program, which we have now turned into a digital program, individually led and completed either on a computer or on a tablet or mobile device for a UK audience. We've randomized 92 participants. So we have an intervention group and a control group. So we'll compare if they see sort of benefit from this program. And then we've also got a qualitative process evaluation to understand a little bit more in depth how this program might work for people and how it might be possible to roll it out in future into NHS settings. So this is an ongoing study, but just one thing I did want to highlight was one of the questionnaires that we sent out to participants fed back to us that we had nearly 80% of people experiencing work-related changes due to COVID. Now, I think this is something that we're definitely going to need to think about in the future because the pandemic has changed how people work, has changed how people experience work. So this will form part of our analysis going forward and will be really useful to find out more about. So these are my references. That was a very quick tour of research being done here at Leeds. And if anybody has any questions, please put them in the Q&A function. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Charlie. That was brilliant review of the literature and some of the work that you've been involved in. So we're going to move on to Joanne now. And Joanne is an occupational therapist based at UCLH. So we're hoping that Joanne will talk to us from the practice perspective about how we support people with MS in employment and transitioning.
So thank you for the introduction, Helen. As I said, I'm an occupational therapist working in a vocational rehab team. Our service was started in 2013 on the back of Professor Playford and Dr. Sweetland's kind of research, which looked at supporting people with MS, which was the working yet worried. And so that was a really nice background to our service. And we currently exist as neurologists and 3 occupational therapists and 1.6 psychologists. And we see on average about 360 new patients a year, and of that about a third of them are people with MS. We have really great links with our MS team, so feel confident that people are able to be referred to us at the point of need. So just declaration, I have nothing to declare. The aims that I'm going to try and cover in our talk are the bottom 3 about who, when and how, reasonable adjustments and supporting work exit. So the who, when and how, the literature unanimously supports that intervention needs to be happening kind of at an early point at diagnosis. And a study by Rosler in 2002 found that 75% of people with MS leave work voluntarily and before the disease progresses. If you have a service that is a vocational rehabilitation service, then they are very well kind of placed to support with that advice around disclosure, the rights around the Equality Act, managing their disability in the workplace. But if not, then any member of team, like from the MS nurses to the consultants, are very well placed to be providing that. And the MS Society have some fantastic resources that you can, and some toolkits that you can signpost people to in the early stages. So as the disease progresses, there's likely to be intervention that's required in terms of return to work support after a relapse and perhaps living with new symptoms, or perhaps there's been a steady decline and there might be some reasonable adjustments in the workplace. And then as time moves on, then our interventions often work towards a positive work exit. And it's just to say that, usually the work exit is not a surprise. You would have been having a discussion with somebody over the years, and that this person's dipped in and out of your service. And this is supported by Joanna Sweetland's work in 2005, which looked at what people want, and they were requesting for early intervention at the point of diagnosis. They want support to manage their performance rather than their impairments. They want the support to be light touch and focused on specific problems. They don't want lifelong counselling throughout their career. And they found that employer liaison for adjustments is really important. And I think clinically we find that people really value that because lots of people are living with invisible symptoms, and it can be very difficult to explain that to employers as an individual. And then obviously having education and support around managing their condition is a really important factor for them as well. But one of the challenges I think in the NHS is providing this responsive service that is available at the point of need, but it also needs to be a personalised service rather than a programme that someone's fitted into. So the Equality Act really helps to underpin how we engage with an employer and what we're asking for. And this, the Equality Act puts the duty on the employer to make reasonable adjustments to working arrangements or premises in order to prevent a disabled employee or job application from being disadvantaged. And hopefully you can see these pictures here, But you can see in the first slide that there's a barrier to the individual in the wheelchair seeing the baseball game. And each of the individuals are being, sorry, it's a shorter person, not in the wheelchair. Each of the individuals are being treated the same. So the shorter person is disadvantaged. Now, if in the second slide, the people are supported differently and given different levels of support and some adjustments, and they are being treated equitably. But, you know, in an ideal world, that barrier would not be there, and that barrier is removed, and all the people can watch the baseball match without any concerns. So this is what we're trying to achieve when we're looking at reasonable adjustments, is this middle one where people are being treated equitably. And it's quite often a conversation that we do have with employers, that we're not expecting, you know, they might often say, well, if I let you work from home, then I need to let everybody else work from home in this way. But we need to kind of remember that this person does need the adjustments because of their disability. So reasonable adjustments, it's the employer that decides what is reasonable. And then but the Equality Act kind of suggests that the greater pressure is taken into account depending on the size of the company. So a large international public company will have like lots more resources and scope to make larger adjustments than perhaps, you know, a small shop or a small kind of office with 2 or 3 employees. The Equality Act also would be considering the impact that the adjustment has for the employee and also the employer, and the associated costs with it. So we need to be mindful with this when we're kind of looking at identifying reasonable adjustments and putting them forward to the employers. There's no one list of reasonable adjustments, and it's really important that the adjustments are individualised and specific to the person and the job. And in our service, we make sure that we do a thorough assessment of the person's MS symptoms, including their physical, sensory, cognitive, and their fatigue and their mood. We also take into consideration their medication and their emotional adjustment to where they're at in their journey. We consider this alongside the job demand. So quite often, someone that's got, there's not a direct correlation between the level of disability and the ability to do the job. It's about the kind of the job match and the personal fit. So for example, if someone was a bus driver and they had visual problems because of a lesion, that would be a significant problem. But if that person was an office worker and could work with technology which increased the screen, then, you know, it wouldn't be a problem to them working necessarily with adjustments. And the third factor that we are always really mindful of in our service is thinking about not just the physical environment, but the cultural and the social environment and the relationships of the people that they work with, as well as the political policies that they've got access to. So obviously working in the NHS, we have fantastic kind of processes around sick leave and policies around ill health retirement, but, you know, there are other people in other industries that have absolutely no support to occupational health or HR and so forth. And we know from the literature that accommodations, reasonable adjustments are associated with a greater chance of retaining their occupations. So here are just some examples of some reasonable adjustments that we quite often thinking about or, you know, would draw from. Access to work is a fantastic service resource that helps lots of our patients pre-pandemic actually to travel into work with taxis. We also have several patients that have support workers. I can think of a lawyer that has someone to help him scribe in court and carry his stuff to courts for him. And, you know, we've also had we've had doctors or various members of like in various professions have very specialist equipment such as like sit-to-stand wheelchairs or like visual aids provided to them in equipment. So assistive technology is really becoming quite big in the workplace, and I think is having a big impact on people being able to kind of maintain their work actually. You might be looking at changes to the duties and what they undertake. We might do a piece of work and have that around strategies to manage the invisible symptoms such as cognitive issues or fatigue, and those strategies be shared with the employer, like regular rest breaks away from the desk. A big part of working with people with MS is about altering hours or location of work. It might be about flexible working. There may be a need for additional training, mentoring, and supervision support where regular check-ins are provided. If someone is feeling particularly stressed in the workplace, then the health and safety executive like resources have some great risk assessments that is helpful to signpost people to. And there might also be adjustments can also be around modifying internal processes like sickness triggers. For example, we know from the literature that people are likely to have more disability days than an average person without a neurological condition, and so you might want to increase their trigger points so that they're not kind of taking down the capability process. And a big one now, since people have been having like infusions as treatment, is trying to negotiate that there is disability leave allowance for them so that they can have that time off, they can go and receive their treatment so that they can stay well in the workplace. So just to kind of say then that the reason people leave work are complex factors around changing work-life balances, coping styles, level of adjustment, and good work is a really big kind of factor. And I'm just trying to think now. There's been the Taylor Review has written a lovely paper on what is good work there for people to be considering, and that's a big factor of what is a good work exit actually. So we're looking to optimize financial opportunities for the individual. We want there to be an element of choice so that the person is not kind of being managed out and feel that they're being pushed out. And we want to consider the opportunities to fill the social and occupational void at the end of it. And as a team, we quite often work through the work exit is looking at validating of person's perceived difficulty. So that might be a cognitive assessment or support to gain their insight. We may be looking to review the impact of work on their health and well-being if they have got insight into cognitive difficulties and they feel like they're working all of the time just to kind of stay above water. So we might be considering some time out on sick leave to manage their mental health, weigh up the kind of pros and cons, think about, is it a change in hours? Is it about transferable skills to redeployment? Is it a medical retirement that we're looking for? And all the time we'll be communicating this with the employers. But if things are not going so well, then we need to be looking at signposting the individual to perhaps legal advice that's available through the Disability Law Service or ACAS, and thinking about the financial situation, how are they accessing benefits, what is there available to them out there through the work exit program to them, and then finally establishing a new routine and structure, and this might be through volunteering or other ways. So I'm sorry if I've gone over slightly, but thank you.
It was well worth it, Joanne. No, that was absolutely fantastic. A really great overview and thought-provoking, I think, for all of us. And it sounds like an impressive team that you have there at UCLH. So thank you very much. So I'm going to introduce Mark then, who's our last speaker. And Mark is head of comms at Shift MS. But this evening, he's going to talk to us about his own lived experience of employment and MS.
Yes, so actually, just to correct you, I've just about 4 weeks ago taken medical retirement from Shift.ms. So I can, depending on time, I can relate that part of my experience as well. But I think I have been extremely lucky in my career, just having had a good career, but also MS handling wise from the company. So in terms of where I am on my MS journey, I'm secondary progressive, EDSS probably 6.5 to 7 somewhere. I'm sitting on a chair at the moment, but I'm a wheelchair user. I've also got a suprapubic catheter, and I've collected most of the symptoms along the way now. So that's where I am. My first symptoms were 1992, when I was working for Euro Disney, the opening of the theme park, Disneyland Paris. I was there for several years. Bladder issues, pins and needles, every so often drop foot, but nothing that really flagged up something serious or that I put together. And that carried on for 15 years until 2007 or 2006, when I was diagnosed with relapsing remitting MS. By that time, I'd come back to the UK. I was married with one child, a second on the way, and I was in a senior role for Dixons, at the time called Dixons Retail, went on to become Dixons Carphone when we merged with Carphone Warehouse, and since I've left, has now become Currys PLC. So a big company, back to how Joanne was talking about that, the differentials there. So I think in terms of this sort of luck, or the way I was treated, I want to talk about 3 instances. So the first was when I was diagnosed. Now I'm open and honest and a bit open to a fault. So actually, I told everybody and everything in the business about my diagnosis. And when I was diagnosed, of course, I went home to punch walls and drink gin and sob and whatever for about 2 weeks. And when I came back, the team around me, the comms team, so all the different versions of PR, had done some research into not only MS, but what I would be experiencing, what I might be thinking, what I might be fearing, and just knew how to talk to me. And of course, you know, with MS and any disability really, that there's an awful lot of people in the world who will then go out of their way never to talk to you again. But my team were very different, and I got that sense of allyship right around me from the beginning. I did take on some counselling because I worked for a big company. I had the benefits of being able to dip in and out of counselling, and I kind of go about every 3 years for a series of counselling just to stay on the straight and narrow with my condition as it progresses. So that was point one. Just from the beginning, I felt thoroughly supported by the team around me and actually senior management. I was at a senior level, so I was reporting into the board and to my CEO, and they were all totally on board with it. Now, PR is a great fun role, but it does involve getting into London, having a few too many drinks with journalists, out of hours calls. It's pretty intense. So 3 or 4 years later, by which time I was walking drunk, verging on using a walking stick, the company called me into a room. And this is my second point that I wanted to refer to. I feared 2 things: either a big check saying thanks very much much, Mark. Off you go into the distance. You've been a great asset. Or congratulations, Mark, we're making you chief photocopier, something similar to that. Actually, what happened, and this was my boss and the group HR director, they sat me down and said, look, Mark, we can see you're starting to struggle. You haven't let us down at all. We want to work with you to find a role that will work for the company and for us. So no chief photocopying, nothing silly in the corner, stamping things or whatever. It so happened that social media was emerging as a power at the time, and I was talking to the same journalists that I used to be in London with more and more often on social media, on Twitter, and reporting back that so-and-so from the Mail on Sunday was interested in this, so-and-so from the Telegraph would be really interested in this, so-and-so's angry about this. So I was playing a communications role that hadn't been envisaged, but having had the time to think about it and having had that offer from the company, we created a role where I became head of group social media. So that was not retweet to win a washing machine or an iPad. It was actually talking to the journalists just in a different fashion, and it being integrated within the same comms team that I'd worked with. And by the way, they allowed me to work from home as and when I wanted, and also paid me 5 days a week for a 4-day week. So just amazing support to allow me to keep working for a big company and feel productive and feel valued. That felt amazing. And out of that, by the way, we made our CEO at the time, Sebastian James, who's now the CEO of Boots. He became the most followed CEO, FTSE 100 CEO on Twitter, which is, so there was benefit. He wrote the tweets, I nagged him to do them. So jump forward again, by which time we'd merged with Carphone Warehouse, moved offices. I was going in about once every 2 weeks, and fatigue and cog fog being key. And I went to them and said, look, it's time for me to go. I can't remember if I was on 3 months notice or 6 months notice, but anyway, they gave me plenty more than that as a goodbye check. Now, the result of that was, and you can probably hear it, I'm still a huge ambassador for the company. If I'm buying electricals, I could go on Amazon, I could go to John Lewis, I'll still buy from Currys, and I talk them up in everything I do. So I'm this ambassador there. But the other thing that happened was I went on LinkedIn, as is traditional nowadays, to write a fine farewell note about what a glorious time you've had. But actually, I wrote one that it really summed up those 3 sections, but I remember it finished, be like Dixon's car phone, and it went viral. 875,000 views it got, and I got lots of little job opportunities. I wasn't looking for anything approaching full-time, but one of the jobs was with Shift.ms, where I was head of comms for 4 years. I got a couple of advisory jobs, and I started tumbling into or going into patient advocacy and more public speaking. So that was all because of the right treatment from the company and from the very senior bosses from a company employing 40,000 people. So I was incredibly lucky to have that opportunity to continue work. Now, I went to you work in Leeds, Helen, and you may well know George from Shift.ms. They're based in Leeds, and again, there was no pressure from George for me to leave, but cog fog and fatigue were really factors in making the final decision. Also, the access to my private pension pot to make the reasonable adjustments to my home. So I made the decision, and much against George's protestations, to make the departure. It was just interesting, and I haven't really created a argument about medical retirement yet, but I tell you what, it hit me really hard. I've been very lucky in terms of mental health all through my MS journey, which has been pretty rough. But this bit hit me really hard, and even though I'm still doing lots of patient advocacy, I'm earning decent money, public speaking, the sense of retirement from a company really hit me hard. So I've done it at the right time. If you hear building work, it's because the bathroom's being changed right now. Yeah, I think taking people through that moment of medical retirement is important and huge, but certainly for me. And interestingly, my last point, Lived Health, which is the video offshoot of Shift.ms, which produces videos for and by MSers and now for Parkinson's, actually, recently asked on Twitter what was the most difficult decision you'd made in your MS life. I replied, it was medical retirement, and there was a bit of a pile-in from other MSers on Twitter, all saying the same. So I think medical retirement, or any kind of retirement, I guess, I've made it to 53 before I retired, is not to be underestimated. There is a time for it. I've done it for the right reason. I don't regret it, but it hurt. Here endeth the lesson.
No, thank you so much, Mark, for talking us through that. And I mean, first of all, for talking, through your working career, and actually your experience, that allyship really stood out to me, when you talked about your team, when you got the diagnosis, all trying to learn about MS and support you and understand. It sounds really great. And I guess you were pretty bold around disclosure, so that you let everybody know pretty quickly about disclosure. But I think, it's obviously very early days in your medical retirement, but it would be great if you could, as you adjust to it, and maybe talk to us about it another time around that big step that people have to take, and how we as healthcare professionals, how employers can support that transition out of work, because it is a major transition in life, isn't it?
Absolutely, and I didn't appreciate it until the day. I took, I don't know, 3 months of discussions with my wife before announcing it to George. And the day I signed off my email from Shift.ms was just horrible, but it was the right thing to do.
Yeah. Okay, well, we look forward to seeing the results of the building work in the background.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right, okay, so just to go on to there is a question for you, Mark, in the Q&A, which is, Mark, how easy is it to find something meaningful to fill the work gap, given the kind of symptoms that prompted you to decide to leave work?
There was mention of COVID before, and I do think the world has opened up to a large number of disabled people with work from home opportunities. I can't answer that personally. I can answer that personally, but I don't have any stats to back it up. But I'm very lucky in that I was already public speaking, and now I can tout myself around on LinkedIn heavily. Patient advocacy isn't for everyone, but I'm on board with several pharmaceuticals, including Novartis. I'm lucky, but that bus driver example was perfect. I'm lucky in the sense that I can just type from bed on my iPad and make a real income still. So work in progress, I think. But again, I'm lucky. So I'll come out of this bit of a dip. I've just come back from a sailing trip on a tool ship with the Jubilee Sailing Trust. I'm talking about that on LinkedIn fairly regularly at the moment, because I needed that. I'm already a happier person than I was a month ago. I needed that huge refresh.
That sounds fantastic. So I'm conscious that we are, I mean, it's been such a great webinar, so interesting to hear from, Charlie, Joanne and Mark, and to bring those perspectives together. So I'm sure that we could carry on for quite a while having questions. So can I just say thanks so much, Mark, Joanne and Charlie, for such great insights.